My wife's little homemade shelves for her seed starts for her garden. She's got all kinds of good stuff here. Got lettuce and broccoli and spinach and all her tomatoes and her peppers right there. She's got some sunflowers growing, and I'm not sure what she's got going on there. But anyway, this is one side of the garage. The rest of the garage is absolute chaos. This was nice and clean until I needed to build a bunch of tie rods back to back, and I came in here and just destroyed the garage. So pardon the mess. My wife is probably going to be mad at me for showing everybody what our garage looks like right now, but let me show you a couple things. So first, here is my first attempt at a tie rod. So it's kind of dark, kind of hard to see, but I took these weld-on 3/4 inch fine adapters. You can see on the inside they're threaded for receiving those heim joints. Super cool little pieces of gear and not too expensive. The price they were giving me at Direct Off-Road was really affordable, and I was really happy with them. But you can see here I had a bit of a problem. You can see how thin that is. Let me see if I can get it to focus. There you go. The sidewall on this pipe that I bought was really thin. I thought a 1-inch pipe would be a big improvement on the original, which if I can find, I'll show you. But it wasn't. My welds were fine. I had decent penetration and everything, but the shear force, the actual physical shear force of that hydraulic ram going back and forth across this thing, not only ripped the tie rod bracket off, it actually ripped the sidewall. So this was just not up to the task. And you can see the radius of this thing. I'll show you how bent it is. That's about the angle that it needs to be at. But I tried to pound it into that shape, thinking it was a much smaller radius, and I ended up kinking it and beating it to tar, and it just looked awful. It's some of the worst work I've done, but it was working for a while. Got me through days and days of work before it broke, but then it finally broke. So I had to make the new one, and to do that, I built myself a little welding table. I have a really bad back from when I was in the military, and so I can't be on the ground welding stuff up. So I went to B&B Metals right across the street from Direct Off-Road and got myself some cheap cut-off ends, some scraps. So I got this really hardy, 1/4 inch plate, maybe 1/8 inch plate. I got some of that. I got this really overkill, stout but cheap piece of 1/8 inch tubing. It's probably, oh gosh, I don't know, 3 inch, something like that. Way too big, but it was really cheap, and it was just a cut-off section, exactly the height that I wanted it. So I got that, and I had a bunch of scrap angle iron, so I cut myself some slits in the bottom of the pipe and fit the angle iron through it, notched out one of the pieces of angle iron so it would kind of like saddle up underneath, and welded it all up. What I should have done first was drill my holes for my casters. I have 4 casters I'm going to put this on so that I can move it around easily, but I didn't drill those holes before I welded it up, and I should have waited because I have a small drill press I could have used. My hand drill is not big enough to hold the bits that I have that are the right size. So I haven't gotten to it yet. It's really wobbly because of it, but for welding purposes, it does a great job. Here's where all my spare angle iron comes from. A piece of scrap that we found on the ranch, and we... there we go. The autofocus wasn't working. Here's a piece of scrap that we had on the ranch, this big platform. I don't know what it was, but it was all broken and rusted. And so we cut it up, and I've been using it for scrap metal, which has been awesome because if you do any welding around the ranch or any kind of metal repairs, you know having angle iron around is just amazing. It's super useful stuff. You can cut it into small chunks for little flat stock projects and all kinds of good stuff. So I took a piece of that angle iron and I welded it along here so that when I'm working with pipes, such as tie rods, I can clamp them to this off this back edge here, and I can do all my welding, my cutting, all kinds of stuff. So that's been really handy. So anyway, built myself this welding table and got my tie rod, the one that's out there on the tractor right now that you saw in the last video, and it's good to go. It's running fine. So super happy with that. And the welds seem to be holding, but I was still kind of dialing in my settings, really learning how to weld. And unfortunately, the welder I'm working with is not the greatest welder. However, I will say, if I can learn how to weld with this guy and do a good job, I should be fine with anything nicer. So I don't want to be ungrateful for what I have. I do have this little Harbor Freight welder. It's the old style 90 amp. Gosh, I probably paid 90 bucks for this thing like 8 years ago or something, 7 years ago. It sat here for 6 years, moved around to 3 different homes with me, and I hadn't even touched it. I fired it up for this tie rod project and it didn't skip a beat. It was throwing down beads, no problem. But it takes a little tweaking to get it working right. I'll go over that maybe in another video, but you can see I've got a different ground clamp on it than used to be there. I'm running 030 wire. It's a little flux core welder, but if you need to weld up some thin stuff, and you just need something quick, especially if you're just trying to get it repaired enough to get back into the shop, that's a great little welder. I'd definitely pick one up on Craigslist. You can probably get them for 50, 75 bucks, if not less. A lot of people don't hold on to them. They get them, they start learning how to weld, and then they realize it's pretty limited, and so they jump ship. They never actually learn how to use it. I've gotten fairly decent with it, and it's not a bad little welder if you do a couple things to it. So maybe I'll make another video someday where I go into how to improve that guy and get decent welds out of it. But like I said, I'm not an amazing welder. I'm not wowing anybody, but I can do okay with it. So anyway, yeah, that's probably about it for this video. We'll talk about exhaust here in a little bit with what I'm doing, what the tractor came with. So stay tuned.